Humanity Matters.
Hello, and thank you for joining me today. I'm your host, Rebecca Sparacio. This podcast is a production of the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center of Nassau County. On today's episode, this is part 2 of today's episode of Inheriting Memory on hmTv. My special guest, Degi Ruben, will join me for a conversation about being a third-generation Holocaust survivor. And we're going to begin this episode on the impact that Degi's grandparents' story had on her. So how has the experiences of your grandparents and of your mother, how has that influenced your values, fears, ambitions, and worldview?
Yes, well, very, very powerfully, because in some ways, more sort of emotional, in terms of being conscious of antisemitism, being conscious of the ever-present possibility that all this could happen again. And so I would say that in many ways it made me think about my Judaism, in a different way than maybe someone who doesn't have that, whether there's observance or not. For me, it's always been very existential. So, like I said, it always felt like a condition that was in the background. So as a result, it's just always there, no matter what. So as an example, just throughout my childhood and college, it's not that I was paranoid, but I was extra alert to anything that seemed like it was had a tinge of some kind of Jew hatred, basically, or antisemitism. And I would say, especially in college, thinking about what I wanted to do with my life and just being more of an adult, I knew that I wanted to continue to do something with the information. And I didn't really think at the time that I would end up being a Jewish educator. But that is what I ended up doing, and deciding to do that after I had my first child, and just realizing how much Judaism and the being a third generation survivor had affected me, and wanting to teach and wanting to keep it going, and pass on that information. So, and sort of to answer the other part of the question, to me, it's just made Judaism, and also Israel, having been born there, it just made it come even more to the forefront as I've gotten older. And I think it's, one might think that everything that happened with the Holocaust would make somebody maybe want to have less involvement or be cynical. And I know some do, or not have much to do with their Judaism. But for me, it strengthened everything. So yeah, hopefully that answered the question.
Okay. Yeah. And it sounds like there's a real sense of responsibility that you felt to transmit their stories and to continue educating people about Judaism. Can you tell me a little bit about being a Jewish educator and the types of things you emphasize in your teachings?
I started out doing it because I was able to do it part-time when my daughter was a baby and we had moved to Savannah. And so it started out just kind of being very straightforward information that they said, can you teach sixth graders about Torah and prayer and, good works. So it started that way, but very quickly I found that whenever I got to the point about talking about the Holocaust, and I've taught a number of different ages, but sixth grade, what I started with, they they were so fixated on wanting to hear the stories, wanting to know the details. And so I think that really brought home how starved, kids, especially Jewish kids, are for those firsthand stories, or as firsthand as they could be. And so I tried to bring in, Holocaust education and also Israel education to my teaching. And I think it made me, in many ways, a better educator, because I tried to bring it all together. That there, these things about Judaism, in addition to ritual, in addition to holidays, in addition to history, that affect people like me personally. That it happened, that this thing happened to my mother, that my parents lived in Israel. My father fought in the IDF, and, what Israel represented and represents to victims of anti-Semitism. And so it's so gratifying, because it feels like I have so much reason to teach and to share the information.
I'm sure those kids are really lucky to hear these stories from you. It sounds like it's really enriching for them. Can I ask, how did your parents end up in Israel? Did they move from the US back to Israel? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
It's so interesting. And it's all I think it's very much related to their own experiences. So for my mother, she developed a love of Israel from everything she knew and had learned about. My grandfather was wonderful with languages. He probably knew about 6 different languages, and she was very good with languages too, and learned Hebrew. I mean, as a high schooler, was able to learn it and speak it. And so she decided when she graduated high school that she wanted to be part of a group that was going to go to Israel and found a kibbutz. It was with the group Young Judea, which was very Zionist. And so she traveled to Israel with that group, and met my father. I believe it was the same group, and he had a very different background, but for him, he was equally as taken by Israel and what it represented, and had spent a summer there. So they met and realized just what a shared sense they had of what kind of country Israel was and what kind of Jews they were. Both of them felt, from coming from different backgrounds. My father, Jewish, came from a fairly assimilated Jewish family in Brooklyn, no Holocaust connection, but they both felt, from the Holocaust and from other things, they wanted to be in a Jewish space that emphasized survivorship, not victimhood, and this idea of strength and resilience that Israel represented was extremely appealing to them. And so they spent time on a kibbutz in Israel and decided that that was what they wanted to do after, they came back to the States, got married, and then said, bye, family, we're making Aliyah. And so they moved. They ended up going to a kibbutz that was really, really very Israeli, not the one founded by the Americans. And, when I was born on this kibbutz, so they gave me the most Israeli name they possibly could, which is Daganit, which I decided I never want to change, even though I'm in the US, because it's a chance to explain the story to everybody who gets to know me. So yeah, but in terms of being a child of survivors, that was what was very appealing to my mother, to kind of be in a country that was so built on strength, resilience, surviving. But at the same time, her mother had already passed away, and my grandfather, her father, had a stroke. He was getting older. I was the first and only grandchild, and she was starting to feel, and this would have been probably after 5 years of living there. She was starting to feel that she was still American, and my father too. And there's certain things about life on a kibbutz that are not so easy for an American couple to do, such as the babies go into a children's house in many of them, and they are raised, sort of communally. So they did that, but I know my mother didn't love it. So little things like that, they realized their Americanism. And so they ultimately decided when I was about 3 to move back to the States. But both of them being fluent in Hebrew, having such strong ties to Israel, and the connection with the Holocaust, has really been able to bring it all full circle for me.
We're going to turn back to the inherited memory of the Holocaust and how it shapes you. So I wanted to ask about the psychological echo of the trauma of the Holocaust and how that gets passed down. Is there, when you were raising your daughter, did you feel that, you thought about the Holocaust or the trauma of the Holocaust, more so than you had before?
Yes. Not in a way that was really huge, not in anything that kind of affected it in a very significant way, but I think subtly, little things here and there, such as really wanting to have them in Jewish spaces as much as I could and from as young as they've been. And, lots of Jewish families want their kids to go to Jewish schools and Jewish day schools. But I think mine has come from not just wanting the Jewish connection and the education, but probably some protectiveness as well, and feeling like, we know what happened to members of my family, and I may not be able to control what ultimately happens to them, but as much as I can expose them to, so they went to Jewish preschool, not day school, not past kindergarten and first grade, but Jewish preschool, Jewish camps. We've been to Israel, took them to Israel, and just an emphasis on all the positives of Judaism, the positives and beauty of Israel, and the need to have Judaism be something that lives in our home, that's always there. Because I think I also feel like that's my responsibility, given what happened to so much of my family.
So it sounds like Judaism is a very important part of your life, and you've really instilled it in the lives of your children.
Yeah, and I'll say not so much. I mean, yes, observance. We're not Orthodox, but to the degree that I can do as much as I can on my end, and my husband is on the same page. We want it to just be relevant and and the education especially to be meaningful and to mean something, and not just be, oh, I have to go to Hebrew school, or I have to do this, I have to do that, but that this is what sustained us, and this is what we need to continue. And in particular, coming from what we've come from with my grandparents and their families.
And we talked a lot about your mom as a second generation and you as a third generation. And how do you feel that, you mentioned your mom also was a Holocaust educator. How do you feel that your experiences were different and similar? With your mom being more immediate, did you feel that you had a lot in common with her, or were there some really significant differences?
So my mother definitely turned very much to humor. I think that was her coping mechanism. And can you hear me okay, by the way?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yep.
That the mechanism she used to cope was humor. She would talk about her and her brother telling Holocaust jokes, and sort of nothing was nothing was off the table with jokes, with comedy. And she even, as she was an educator and continued on that role, and even today, she even does stand up occasionally. And Holocaust humor is part of it. She loves to tell jokes. She loves to tell puns. For me, I don't have that. I mean, I can find humor in things. I try to be lighthearted and funny, but to me, I just want to convey what happened, what the significance is, and I probably do it in a more serious way and maybe a little more analytical. For my mother, it probably the comedy and the laughter element is to help deal with the emotional part, because she was so close to that. Whereas for me, I don't really see the comic element the same way that she does. To me, it just doesn't come naturally to me. I'm not a joke teller. I don't find the Holocaust humor as funny as I think she does, ironically enough. So we do come at it from different angles, for sure.
And it's understandable from what you said. Like, it sounds more of like a defense mechanism. Like, she was so close to the story and the trauma that she kind of developed humor as a way to cope.
Exactly.
And we're going to close up just with some questions about the future. And I was wondering, what gives you hope that the story of your grandparents will continue to matter, even with the number of living survivors decreasing?
What gives me hope is, like I said, when I talk about it, when I give classes, and I also have gone and spoken to non-Jewish audiences, non-Jewish children, and the degree with which they have such interest and find the stories so compelling. That's what gives me hope. And also, I think that what's very important to me and to my mother, as we have educated kids and told these stories, is that we really emphasize, and I think your last guest said the same thing, emphasize that this is, what happened with the Holocaust is very specific and shouldn't be compared to anything. It's not the kind of hatred that we see, with other groups. It is specific, exceptional, and so, kind of deserves its own set of circumstances for education. And I really try to emphasize that. And I think kids, adults, I think they respond to it, because I think when they really hear about what happened and how it happened, they recognize that this is a unique type of hatred and a unique type of reaction, than anything else. And this effort to exterminate an entire people is really very powerful for them and compelling, as opposed to the idea of teaching the Holocaust as just part of, we shouldn't hate others, we shouldn't, we shouldn't be racist, all those things. That's all true. But I think when Holocaust survivors or second generation, third generation are able to give the story and give it in that context, that what you're about to hear is really something that's been reserved only for the Jewish people, against the Jewish people, they find that incredibly interesting and compelling. So that gives me hope, in the sense that I think Holocaust educators understand that and teach it in that significant way, or at least I hope so. And that way it keeps it keeps people interested as opposed to if it were generalized. So that does give me hope. And I'll say also, I try as best I can. It's a controversial topic, but as much as I can, I try to weave Israel and Israel importance into that education, because a big part of the story and the story of survival is the fact that we now have a Jewish state that can take care of itself, that can come in and help Jews around the world anywhere, and we have a way of defending ourselves. So that's a very hopeful note, I think, for kids to hear. And I hope that in this environment that we're in right now, that that can still be something that educators emphasize and talk about.
And just one more question. What is your message to listeners? What can they do now to stand against the hatred and the anti-Semitism in the world and preserve the truth and the specificity, like you said, of the Holocaust and of what happened to the Jews?
Yeah, my feeling is to just lean into the Judaism, and I really try, and I try to emphasize with my family and anyone else that, our Judaism can't just be about anti-Semitism or about, what happened in the Holocaust, but that the best defense against it is to learn Torah, to continue, to study, to do rituals, to find meaning in that, take classes, educate, and that it should be, it should be an active engagement with our religion, culture, whatever we are as Jews, and not just a reaction to the negativity. And that, I think maybe people sometimes forget that the best defense is a good offense. And so, just making Judaism important at home with kids, even if it's baby steps, little things like that, to just remind them, and for all of us to remind ourselves that our Judaism is ultimately a joyful, hopeful, positive experience, and not just a reaction to hate.
Yeah, that's really important to remember, that the community and the joy, that's part of Judaism. And it's such a beautiful thing. So we're going to end on that note. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Inheriting Memory on hmTv. I appreciate my guest, Degi, for sharing her insights on her experience. Thank you, Degi. It was a pleasure having you. And if you enjoyed exploring the information, history, and stories in today's conversation, be sure to check out our other podcasts here on hmTv. Please subscribe, share, and stay connected for more engaging conversations. Until next time, take care and be well.